Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be discussing the increasing craziness that's coming from Tucker Carlson, which I find really fascinating. Because if you look at the leading voices on the right that are mad about the war in Iran, some are just like, you could see our episode on Candace Owens, Psychosis Maxing was Candace Owens, but like, she's just like a crazy person, right? Like just an actual crazy person. When you were telling me this morning, and I was like, what the? She thought that Charlie Kirk was trained at a school like for gifted children, like in the X-Men with special telepathic powers.
The first thing that like really caught my attention was that she claimed that Charlie Kirk was a time traveler based on basically a joking, flirty text that he sent to her, where she texted him, "I'm an alien," frowny face, and he responded, "I think I'm a time traveler. This is my home, but I think you found me and time traveled with me." And she took that and just ran with it.
So that's an example of one. Like just not like normal conspiracy theories, like just like actual crazy town stuff. And then you have people like Nick Fuentes, right? But Nick Fuentes has his own agenda, and we'll go into him more later in this because interestingly, I used to believe about Nick Fuentes that he was just sort of a shock jock who was choosing whatever was the most shocking thing to say.
And you don't anymore.
No, I think the war has elucidated his actual coherent agenda more clearly than it was historically. And that has been very interesting to me because then I'm like, oh, now I get what he's actually attempting to do. And it is, what it means is that he is more of a direct enemy of any mainstream MAGA America First conservative than I originally realized.
Really? Okay.
Because I just didn't get it before. And what I've realized is he tells you and his audience what his real goals are. He just leaves out a few steps in between. But to the next point, Tucker's different. Tucker is somebody who seems to be broadly sane. He is somebody who I really enjoyed and watched his content historically, right? Like,
and he's been around for a long time. Like, this is one of those lifetime media figures that, at least if you're a millennial in the United States, has just been part of the media landscape, right?
The end of his run with Fox, which, by the way, people may not know this Collins family lore, but we were supposed to be on his show. We were in talks with his booking team the last Friday that he held the show, but because it was his last show, they changed the scheduling, and that was brought on him all of a sudden out of nowhere. But we were in talks with his booking team, which is really sad because we've never been able to get back in talks with him after that. Like, the team split up. But anyway, during that period, he was, I think, sort of like the key intellectual based voice, like the leading thinker in that degree. This was in the, like, it was post Jordan Peterson at that period, and he had really, I think, sharp and interesting takes. So I hear some of his takes now, and I just am trying to model how he came to an understanding of reality that is so divergent from anything that I believe when I saw him before. And I think I've come to it. Simone helped me by being like, you need to remember he's a boomer. Okay, he's seeing the world through boomer goggles. He's not going to see the world the way you do. But my favorite, and this is one of the quotes that really inspired this for me, was there's been multiple quotes from him recently. A lot of people have heard the one where he said, any Middle Eastern city is better than any American city.
I travel so much that I see it. There's not a single Western city that's thriving. And they're all degrading in exactly the same way.
Is a lot of it just a moral decay, or is it actually true from everything?
It's a lot of things, but it's self-hatred. Every city.
Crazy.
Every European city, every American city. So I notice it because I travel outside the Western world, the white world. I'll just be honest, the white world.
Right.
I travel a lot in the Middle East. It's amazing. It's amazing. And it's incredible to be in a place that has pride in itself, that believes in its religion and culture, that thinks we're onto something. And this is great. Look at what we're doing. We're really proud of this.
Carlson, this one's for you. If you see it, your commentary pushed me towards looking deeper into these systems that we fall blindly in, and it actually made me a Muslim. So Tucker, I would love to talk to you. We make mistakes sometimes, but Tucker, it would be great to talk to you, inshallah, God willing. you should know who Iran is a threat to. So peace be upon you, Tucker.
But he also had one where he was talking about how Moscow was better than American cities.
What was radicalizing, very shocking and very disturbing for me was the city of Moscow, where I'd never been, the biggest city in Europe, 13 million people. And it is so much nicer than any city in my country. I had no idea. It is so much cleaner and safer and prettier aesthetically than any city in the United States that you have to, and this is non-ideological.
Oh, but that was it. But that was a separate stage. Like, there are these various points in recent history where Tucker Carlson has done something that makes him seem like a foreign agent, like going to Moscow and walking through the grocery stores and being like, oh my gosh, this is so much better than America. And now he's just doing it with Middle East. This is like Middle East edition.
Yeah. So first of all, a lot of people are like, oh, he can't be a foreign agent because he's super rich, which is not true. It is true that his stepmother owned a family fortune from some food production company that was bought by Campbell like 40 years ago, but not anymore. Like the money, from what we can tell from records, didn't pass to him. So he actually might be up for money. And if you look at the amount of money he has, it's that sweet spot that comes from, it's estimated around 50 million, which is that sweet spot of like, I'm taking bribes, but I'm not stupidly wealthy from the bribes, that bribes don't make sense anymore. So that could,
you think, well, wait. You're trying to argue that someone with $50 million feels like they need more money?
50 million is the amount of money I typically expect an extremely corrupt person to be. If I was a corrupt official in the Middle East, I would expect them to have around $50 million. If I was a corrupt Russian, I'd expect them to have around $50 million. If I was somebody taking, it's the amount that you can earn from bribes where you still want more bribes. Like if he had like $1 billion, I wouldn't think that Russia or Qatar could bribe him.
I think maybe there's the point to be made too, that wealthy people aren't above loving a good deal or free things. In fact, many people who have worked for high net worth individuals have commented that there is no one more, like, what's the word? Miserly. Yeah. No one more miserly than really rich people who are like, well, I'm not going to pay like $2.50 as a convenience fee for this. You need to walk 5 blocks to, that kind of thing.
The point being, he's gone pretty far and put a lot of effort into debasing himself. It seems that there's some motivation for this, and that's what I want to dig into.
Okay, just immediate counterpoint. What if saying these things and garnering the controversy, which we are now participating in, drives views, which is to his benefit, whether or not it's money or attention? Sometimes wealthy people just really want attention, and he's certainly getting it by dealing these takes out.
Well, at least historically, that didn't seem to be his strategy, which you could say is maybe post-Fox, he's tried to move to a just anything for attention strategy.
Keep in mind, he's also interviewing people like Nick Fuentes, which again is garnering a lot of controversy, and people really came at him for, according to them, platforming this terrible person who should not be getting any more attention. So he's done things that would be concurrent with a strategy to get views based on controversy.
But there's a difference between controversy and making yourself look stupid. And some of the stuff that he's done recently just looks stupid. So an example, and we'll go into it in a bit, were his like Dubai comments about how perfect Dubai is and how everything in Dubai is great and why can't America be more like Dubai? And I was telling someone, I was like, going to Dubai and thinking that it's like this beautiful, perfect place is a bit like going to Disney World and coming back and being like, oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. I saw the Elsa. She was just standing in the road hugging children. She's the most amazing person. Everything.
God forbid she actually be governing over her country. At least that's concurrent with the lore.
Yeah, the parallels are really actually strong here because people don't know Disney World has plainclothes agents all over the street, like watching to make sure that like nobody's throwing a fit or being unhappy, and you'll be like arrested and removed from the park if you are. And Dubai works on a very similar system outside of like all the slavery and everything that makes the Emirates work, with 80% of the people there not being citizens and having to live by very different laws and having a very two-tiered system between Emiratis and non-Emiratis. But even
there's actually like influencers there have spoken very openly about their experience with the authorities regulating what influencers are allowed to say. I saw one clip where an influencer was talking about actually being taken in to talk with these people who didn't arrest him or detain him. They just brought him in, and he commented on how young and attractive they were. And
yeah, we were joking that like when she first told me this, I was like, oh my God, one really good way to handle it, to have like really attractive looking, like blinged out like Emirates. But then because Emirates, if they are working in a position like that, bureaucratic positions, they often have quite a lot of wealth. So you would expect them to have like their designer brands, walking in like a group with like a boombox and like very Zoolander to come and arrest
Mugatu. It's basically Mugatu.
Aren't you afraid the fashion police will come and beat you with their fabulous batons?
Yeah, basically
Mugatu. Now. It's exactly that. I just love it so much.
I'm doing like poses in the background while like they're explaining to the influencer. Like
yes. Exactly.
Like,
it is a very Zoolander kind of situation where everything's just kind of pretend ridiculous world and everything's kind of on the surface. Because I've also looked at some of the types of properties and areas that people are encountering when in Dubai. And it's very much that like manufactured luxury where if you come from a disadvantaged background and you may not be familiar with, I don't know, historical luxury, you think it's nice, but it's often very thin and not a lot of actual thought or even good design has gone into it. Then obviously there's some areas and buildings and stuff in Dubai with really, really good construction, excellent fixtures and everything. But I think there's a lot of it that just is a fake luxury in the way like, you know, a butterfly might have a face on its wings. And like all these people like see, they're like, oh, a face, yeah. It's a face. And it's not. No, it has been designed to make you believe that for a specific strategic reason.
Dubai is actually, for people who haven't been to Dubai.
Have you been? Did you go on that?
Of course I've been to Dubai. Yeah. Dubai is it really sort of reminds me of a giant mall with extra high ceilings everywhere you go and like way too much marble, but it doesn't feel like nice. It has that second world. Anyone who's ever lived in a second world country where like all the food's just like a little off and you can't get the highest quality anything and everything feels a little like construction problems, stuff like this. Dubai has a similar vibe to it, but very wealthy and more polished, and also stupidly hot. Like everything is stupidly hot. But anyway, I want to go into his actual quotes here and we can dissect what he might be getting at. So the first one that really got me was, there's not a single Western city that's thriving. They're all in moral and physical decay because of self-hatred and a lost will to live. What's fascinating is even in this attack on the West here, he is driving more. There are ways to say that the urban monoculture is a problem without being self-hating Westerner. And yet he is saying, I am a self-hating Westerner because the West is failing and self-hating, right? I'm like, you don't need to drive the very thing that you say that you're against, right? There's ways to attack, you know, progressive tendencies, urban monoculture tendencies, while saying that this isn't true of all layers of Western society, certainly not the layers that we're attempting to save. But then he goes on to say things like Sharia law has made Islamic countries more advanced than the West. And I travel a lot in the Middle East. It's amazing. The Muslim countries governed by Sharia law. And you go there and it's incredible to be in a place that has pride in itself, that believes in its religion and culture, that thinks we're onto something. That kind of self-confidence is what creates stability and hospitality. And in a place like Dubai, which is basically, it's a luxury brand. Basically, people go to Dubai because it's beautiful, rich, and clean, and above all, because it's safe. And it's got the busiest airport in the world. And he goes, you start seeing a video on Instagram of smoke in the Dubai airport, and you're like, I think I'm going to Cabo this year. Oh, sorry, drug cartels, whatever. Maybe I'll go to Sedona this year, implying a preference shift away from the United States. And he goes on to say, anyone who likes decency and order and cleanliness is hoping the Gulf will recover. The Gulf is not a threat to us. These are some of our closest allies. So huge notes we need to add to a lot of the stuff he's saying here. First, really weird that he notes that all countries under Sharia law, or he is implying, are much cleaner and nicer than American cities. There are a handful of places where you could plausibly make this argument. Some cities in Dubai, Qatar, a few in Saudi Arabia, but The vast minority. The vast majority of countries under Sharia law are like some of the biggest on earth. If and this is weird to me. Like, has he not been like anywhere else in the Middle East? Has he not been anywhere in North Africa? Like, I'm actually, has he never even been to like Egypt? Like, that's in Egypt, Morocco, like anywhere, right? Like, these are Palestine is another example of this. These places, there is like literally, I don't think, I think if you go to some of the worst neighborhoods in the United States, they would be about equivalent to neighborhoods at the top 10% in most of these other countries. Now, no, here, I'm not saying the top 1% because there's some extremely wealthy people in these countries. But I think around the top 10% would be equivalent with like a dangerous, like a strawberry mansion in Philadelphia or something like that. An example of this in Egypt, they did a poll on what percent of women were SA'd. Do you know what percent of Egyptian women have been SA'd?
I mean, how are they defining it?
I don't remember.
No.
By the way,
yeah, but like, okay, what, like 20?
99 or 98%. Basically, all women in Egypt have been sexually assaulted.
Okay.
But
Well,
this is what I mean when people are like, "Oh, it's not really that dangerous to be in Egypt." It's like, no, it really is. And this is one of those things. This is just like an anti-reality statement. The second anti-reality statement, and I mean, he must know this, he's an educated person, is that the countries in the Gulf right now are the countries that are promoting us finishing this war most aggressively. Specifically, because if we don't finish the war, this is the thing that gets me. Okay, we don't finish the war. We let Iran just control the Strait of Hormuz. They continue blocking it. Economically, we point out China is the main global power who's hurt by that. But who is the biggest regional power who's hurt by that? It's Qatar. That is classically one of our biggest enemies in the region and one of Iran's biggest friends. And people who are like, oh no, Iran is selectively letting ships to like 2 a day on average, not at a meaningful rate. And they charge them like $2 million to get through. So they're not even like economically that viable. This is what it's been offering China to try to get Chinese ships through. The point being is this is a war that and it makes sense why Saudi Arabia wants us to finish this in the UAE and Qatar wants us to finish it. If we don't finish it, even Saudi Arabia ships a lot of its oil through the Strait of like they're not as
isn't it Hormuz?
Hormuz or something. Yeah, I don't know. The UAE does. Qatar definitely does. Like the UAE might be able to like, because they're sort of down near the bottom of it, find some sort of solution to this, but Qatar definitely can't. So he's saying stuff like this, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? So then I want to go into other things he said and see if I can piece together a coherent world ideology. Like, why is he cheering for Sharia law?
Yeah. Well, also because even in his typical recording studio, you know, all his branding is Christian American dad man, right? Like that's kind of what he's going for with the vest and everything. Like and the white button down. It's just so odd to me that he would be saying all this very non-Christian. I mean, he even talks about it when he's like, oh, you know, I'm a Christian man, but you know, these people aren't, you know, making me convert my religion. They're fine with me. They, you know, I tell them that I believe in Jesus and they're like, good for you. And he's keeping the branding. It just surprises me that therefore he's so anti-America for that reason. And I'm sure he would take exception to being accused of being anti-American. He would probably push back and be like, no, I believe in America. I want an America where people are proud of themselves, who are proud to be who they are. Because in a clip that I watched recently, he was talking not just about the Middle East, but how like when you go to Japan, everyone's so proud about, you know, who they are and confident in themselves. And I think maybe what he's alluding to here is this urban monoculture associated self-hatred that he's just so sick of that now at this point, anything that's not that looks good.
Well, so in his explicit quote where he was talking about Qatar and he's like, and look, Qatar is so diverse. Like he wants America to be more diverse. And he goes, but in America, like we say we want diversity, but then we move away when too many black people move into our neighborhoods and stuff like that.
Those people are happy They're welcoming of others. They're tolerant of diversity. Like we always talk about tolerant of diversity. There's none of that here. Are you kidding? All the whites, oh, we love black people. Then they run and move to Bozeman because there are no black people.
Absolutely. Send their kid to the...
They hate diversity.
They hate it.
And our version of it isn't working at all. At all. So, but you go to a country like Japan or the Emirates or Qatar or Saudi Arabia, and you see that when people are self-confident, when they're really pleased with what they're doing and they believe that their system is the right system, that self-confidence results in a kind of welcoming attitude.
They're Muslims.
It's a country governed by Sharia law.
Right.
I mean, and they're like, that's great.
Good for you. Yeah.
Like promoting more integration in the United States, where I should point out, by the way, if you're familiar with the way places like Dubai are actually handled, they have giant, incredibly segregated ghettos where they keep their workforces of mostly Indians and some Africans. And that where the cities look diverse, all you're seeing is ultra rich people from all over the world who have escaped with their country's money. That's typically why you end up in Dubai if you were a corrupt leader in part of Africa or you were a corrupt leader. And so, of course, that's going to, in East Asia, that's going to look very diverse. On the surface, if you take the most corrupt people from all over the world, they're going to be able to interact with each other plainly, like they're not going to need to steal from each other or anything like this. And you basically keep everyone else in a open air prison. That's going to look really nice on face value, but that's not actual diversity, right? Nobody, like when you're at Harvard, right? And you are going to like your student club and a bunch of black people show up, you don't think you're about to get jumped by them, right? No Harvard student is like, a bunch of, but the same student, in a different context may, walking alone at night on the street, walk to the other side of the road. And that's because those are two different populations that you're dealing with, right? And every sane person is aware that there is a difference between, random African immigrants and super wealthy people who have escaped their country to live in Dubai. But I found that interesting that he's still pushing this like boomer narrative of like the ultra integrated iteration of America, where even I would say America can work with different populations while having regional ghettos. Like, I do not think we need to force integrate people of different racial groups or even create cultural pressure to do that. Like, it's okay if people want to live predominantly around people who are like themselves. And we shouldn't, that Tucker's creating this kind of shame. So before I go further with this, I'll just explain where I think he's getting that perspective from. I think he has this boomer idea of America as like a true melting pot, and like diversity is actually our strength, and that he's still attempting to push that mindset of which basically no mainstream youth conservative agrees with. And I think that like even people like us, where I'm like, look, you do get some value from diversity. Like, I don't want a meal that's just one food, right? Like one ingredient, but a meal isn't better because you added more ingredients. And there are some ingredients that just don't go together and shouldn't be on the same plate. And I think that that's the way we need to treat our country in immigration and diversity, is to realize that different groups are actually different, and that some of them are going to have a higher probability of integrating and becoming good American citizens. And even of the traditional American cultural groups, they interact with each other in unique ways, and they shouldn't be forced to integrate. But that's, I think, what many modern like center conservatives think, which is not what he thinks. He wants to go back to boomer vision of American patriotism. But then he says stuff like this: what was radicalizing and very shocking, this is during his tour of Moscow, it was very disturbing for me, it was the city of Moscow, the biggest city in Europe with 13 million people. It's so much nicer than any city in my country. It's so much cleaner, safer, prettier, aesthetically, its architecture, its food, its service, than any city in the United States. And then specifically on the Moscow subway specifically, he said it's nicer than in our country. No graffiti, no smells, no drug addicts. So note here, the Moscow subway is genuinely really nice, but that's because of a holdover of communism, where they wanted to make the subway look really nice because they thought that like made everything look nice. But Moscow itself is one of the worst like most dangerous cities in all of Europe, like one of the most gangstery.
How so? Just in terms of crime stats or what?
Yeah, crime, rundownness, falling apartness, like bleakness.
A nice cafe. You probably can ask for Ahmad tea. Someone's drying out their shoes, pillow. I don't know what's going on here.
Like, and this is even the thing. If he had said those same things, but he was touring St. Petersburg, I'd be like, oh yeah, but that's just St. Petersburg. You should go to Moscow and see how bad it can be. But Moscow's not like there is like a 4-block area of Moscow that is like reasonably like, you know, like rich part. And then you get outside of that and Moscow is like, I know I've actively from like my friends who travel a lot. I was thinking about going to Moscow once and they were like, because one of my good friends worked in Moscow for a while in like terrorism related stuff. And she was like, bro, you do not want to go to Moscow. And this was, you know who I'm talking about, Simone. She goes, you do not.
I'm a big fan of St. Petersburg. And I think you've been to St. Petersburg.
She's like, go to St. Petersburg. And I'm like, I've been to St. Petersburg. It's great. But she's like, Moscow is not St. Petersburg. Do not think you're going to get the St. Petersburg experience from Moscow.
So is it like Edinburgh, Glasgow kind of thing or what?
No. Well, no, Glasgow gets a worse reputation than it actually is. Glasgow's mostly fine in the historic parts. I might call it one of my favorite cities, actually. It's a fine city. Now there are districts.
Yeah, but that's the point. Is maybe Moscow also is mostly really cool, especially in the historic parts, and it just has less.
Moscow's more like a state capital. You know, one of those cities that really just exists for administration. It's like the bureaucracy.
Kind of like DC. Like no one actually. No, because a lot of people live there. I think I follow some influencers who live there and talk about what it's like living in this
live there. It's a very populated city, but it's a city that basically became artificially populated during communism as sort of the bureaucratic hive at the center of all bureaucratic hives. If you've ever been to a state capital city, like, you know, the one in Pennsylvania, what's it called again? What's the Pennsylvania? Harrisburg. Or what's the state capital of California?
Sacramento.
So you know what, like Harrisburg and
Great
Sacramento
Tree Museum
have that sort of vibe to them of like the most soulless of soulless cities. And like everything's kind of slummy, everything's kind of dirty, and there's cities that are really only there. They're quite populated, but they're only there like because that's where the organizational administration is. Moscow has a very similar vibe, but like dialed up to 100.
Okay.
So it's not, I don't think he could get this takeaway if he was like being, so that's where I get like the Moscow one, being fooled by Dubai. I can see some witless boomer fooled by Dubai. I can't see anyone unless they had a handler the entire time, which he made. He likely did.
Sure, you must have. I think just the visa situation going to Russia, I think, is fairly.
Maybe that's it. Maybe the reason he had this view on Moscow is he's like when something fits his pre-existing worldview, he has this very uncritical eye to it. And so he goes around and he's like, yeah.
I think he is very trusting. He comes across as very trusting. This is, you know, how his Nick Fuentes interview went. You know, he tries to be empathetic. And I think this is one of the reasons why his interviews go really well is he's not just kind of abrasive and confrontational and not actually listening to people. Like he'll express his doubts with people, but in a very respectful way when he's talking with them. And I think he's a more agreeable personality. Like he's not intentionally or euphorically disagreeable like some media figures. And I think that maybe that leads him when he's traveling in foreign nations to kind of just yes and any, we'll say, propaganda or
I'm putting something together. Well, this could also explain why he has such a negative view of the United States, which is if you grew up with that sort of boomer idea of America where, you know, forced integration is like a obvious and net good, and that a lot of people who grew up in that generation think it's like sort of cool and that they have full permission being American to be down on America and an American culture. and that's almost sort of like a positive thing. Like, it's a very leftist thing to do, but some conservatives that have been around like wealthy circles for long enough and had to code switch into that enough may have accidentally integrated that with their world perspective. And so he goes to other places, and to try to be hospitable because he's got the really nice handler and stuff like that, he ends up saying things like that. Like, this is nicer than anywhere I've seen in America these days, you know? And then he ends up integrating that belief, both complaining about a problem, but also being one of the chief sort of distributors of the problem that he's complaining about, but being unable to see that because he's just trying to be nice in the moment and not having
agreeable and conformist, broadly speaking.
Yeah. Then
okay. Yeah, no. So basically you're saying like he'll pick up the temperature or vibe of a room and then just project it. And so when he's in America and everyone's just around, like on average, especially people sort of in the media and online, are very negative about America. So he just picks up on that and projects it. And then he goes to other countries, and in other countries, he meets with minders and leaders who are obviously very bullish on those countries. And then he's getting the most propagandic highlighted versions
actually
of those.
more
and then he's
than
picking
that.
up on that and saying,
the part of American society that is most anti-America and most negative about America are wealthy, elite Americans. These are people in elite institutions. These are people in elite positions. That's
fair.
The group that he is disproportionately socializing with. However, the people who are most pro,
well, and especially, Malcolm, keep in mind, I think also the old guard of conservatives, which is definitely what he's coming from, instead of the new tech right, is definitely of that more like negative.
Yeah.
Every techno optimist or optimistic patriotic conservative I'm aware of now is more on the new tech right end of the spectrum.
Yeah. Whereas
it's also about his flavor of conservatism.
Yeah, if you go to Russia or Dubai, the ultra wealthy individuals are actually genuinely pretty jingoistic. If you're ultra wealthy in Russia, you're likely making money off of state corruption, right? And so that means that you want Putin and the current regime to stay in power. You are pro this war. You are pro. It's the same with Dubai or Qatar. If you don't make a point of trying to get to know average people on the ground in Dubai and Qatar, and you're just surrounding with the ultra wealthy people at parties and stuff like that, you're going to have this perception that everybody loves being there. That explains it. Yes, a complete lack of curiosity about the perspectives of people outside of his class. That could explain this without needing to add any nefarious, like he's being paid off or anything like that. Other weird things he said that I'm going to try to like find explanations for. Like, what does it like? How did a sane person actually come to this perspective? So he had on Berg recently on his show, who is a well-known Israeli communist. And a lot of people thought that was really weird. But the one thing that Berg does have is he is very anti-Netanyahu, very anti-Zionist. And so I think that like, I can understand that. You want to have on opinions of Israelis who have opinions that other people may not have already heard. So you bring somebody like that onto your show, right? Next, he said, not defending the regime, just saying that Venezuela is one of the most conservative countries in North or South or Central America, second only to El Salvador under Bukele. It's possible we're mad that he doesn't allow gay marriage, that this is a distinct possibility, but no one will say it aloud. The US-backed opposition leader who would take Maduro's place is, of course, pretty eager to get gay marriage in Venezuela. So those of you who thought this whole project was global homo, you're not crazy, actually. So this is what he said on Venezuela, right? That Venezuela is actually good. This was under the Maduro regime, and that our plan was to remove him and replace him with the opposition leader to make gay. Now, of course, none of that happened the way he thought. We removed him and replaced him with somebody to release prisoners of war and help us economically and blockade Cuba and beat the communists, not, you know. So like clearly his world perspective is not predictive of future events or actions. But what's he thinking here? Like why would he be glazing, like to glaze Iran and Venezuela and like what's going on here, right? I think he sees as his core enemy the urban monoculture. But he cannot differentiate, because of its world perspective, between the current Western society and the urban monoculture. So because he hates what he calls global homo, or what we would call like one facet of the urban monoculture, he believed that and he doesn't have a language for that or words for that. He will then project that onto the West more broadly, reflexively. And so when he sees somebody fighting both the West and against gay people, right, like Venezuela is, he sees them as an ally. This could also explain his soft position on Iran. It's like they're fighting against the West. The West is urban monoculture.
So it's almost like he intuitively understands that cancer is bad, and therefore like radiation treatment's good. And then he's like, yes, we need all the radiation, but he doesn't understand that this is like a targeted treatment or something. Like, it's bad metaphor.
Yeah. Because if you, and this is compounded with, because he never hangs out with middle-class people or lower class people. If you leave American cities, right, and you go to the suburbs and you go to, like an outdoor movie screening or something like that, you will see people flying American flags and grilling and integrated, by the way, in like a meaningful context, right? Like you will see people of many different cultures who are just having fun being American. This is a normal sight for people like me. Like Simone, when you and I go out in where we live, which is outside of Philadelphia, and this is the other area where he's like, well, American cities are terrible. And it's like, well, yes, but if the urban monoculture, specifically urban monoculture, is the problem, it intrinsically congregates in cities. If you don't,
and he doesn't even live in a city personally, so I'm also so confused by that. Like I think he lives up in a like remote cabin in Maine, which is
Maine is lovely. How can you be in rural Maine and think that America sucks?
Yeah, this also really confuses me. I'm like, what is he seeing that? I mean, if you're like taking a cab into like the center of New York City, like through Times Square or something, and just being like, ugh, yuck, like this is gross. There's trash everywhere. Like that's my assumption maybe, is that like when he goes into a major US city, it's more likely to be San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York. And as you're driving your Uber through any one of those cities, you're going to be pretty disappointed with what you see. Then you walk into a CVS to pick up some water because you don't have anything. You're staying in like a hotel and everything's locked up. Like he would just see the worst parts of America.
And you have a boomer mindset. So in his boomer mindset, America is two things, right? Like it's the tastemakers, the dominant culture, which he would call Western culture, we call it the urban monoculture, and then Christian culture, which is fighting against that. And like those are the two meaningful factions in his mind, rather than it's the urban monoculture fighting against a large number of alternate cultures that want the various different Christian cultures, various different, even ancestral cultures in the United States. When we talk about like American cultural anthropology in some of our videos, if you don't have that education and you're not prone to seeing things that way, this worldview can make sense. But now I'm like why he's so anti-Trump. So this is like before even the war.
Wasn't he pro-Trump earlier? Doesn't he say in various
and then he goes
like videos that he and Trump are good friends? I mean, like he was invited to the White House. He presumably thinks he's a friend of Trump. I don't understand.
Okay, let's also talk about that. So there was this case where he went on his show looking all freaked out, saying that the CIA had tapped his phone and was trying to frame him for a crime. So a few funny things about this. It turns out that he had a series of meetings with one, I think only 2 days before the main bombing. And so a lot of people were like, why does he think so? The branch that he thought had tapped his phone would have had taps on pretty much everyone in the Iranian government's phone, but they wouldn't have been tapping the phones of random American citizens, which means he might have been. And what I suspect happened is he was trying to book maybe with somebody high in Iran, and that's not an incriminating thing. And then he had a freak out afterwards. But what's humorous about the freak out is a few things. There has been talking that we might have been using him as a counter agent spy, basically feeding him bad information that he would then accidentally feed to Iranians. And given that he appears to be pretty gullible, he may have actually been doing this accidentally. I don't think he would do it intentionally, but I could totally see him doing it accidentally. And we do know that they felt really secure. They were not even having that meeting in the lower, safer levels. They were having it in the mid levels, like right after we had threatened them. So maybe he did actually go and tell them it's all safe. But
it would be really hilarious if Tucker Carlson played a key role in the United States being able to like successfully eliminating Iran's
it would be really
top
funny. But the even funnier thing is some reporter apparently with a lot of connections and like the NSA and the CIA did like a deep dive on this, and she goes, no one has any idea what he's talking about. So it might just be that he thinks he's being tapped and he's being paranoid, or he was trying to like run cover. Like maybe he was talking with somebody that he thought he could get in trouble for, and somebody warned him, and then he had like a panic attack and decided to. That seems more likely to me. But one of the things he ended up saying about the government was, and this is in 2025, mind you, the most depressing thing about the United States in 2025 is that we're led not just by bad people, but by unimpressive, dumb, totally non-creative people. This is a deeply sad thing to say. I literally have never been so impressed with the effectiveness of an administration at achieving aims that you think he would care about, like reducing government size, stuff like this. Obviously, Trump had to pass that big bill because of promises he had already made, but Doge actually did a pretty good job, and Trump has continued to do a good job of shutting down various departments within the government, like USAID and stuff like that, that I'm really, really glad. People have been pointing out how many leftist media outlets have crashed and burned after USAID went out, and now we're like, oh my God, was this like always USAID? You know, like people are like, this was 50% of Somalia's economy, and it's like, why was aid 50% of Somalia's economy? Like, that's a problem, man. I didn't sign up to be the Somalian daycare of actual Somalia, right? Like, but like, how could you say that? Like, if you saw the profiles, to say that the people who are like working at Doge, like my brother being one of them, of course, but then the other people, they were like super geniuses. They were like really cool people. And having some insight into, you know, Simone and I have gone to speak at the White House, meet with people of this administration. And I have met with previous administrations of the past through other means. I've never worked with them directly, but I've met a lot of people who've worked at, because of all of our work with secret societies, other administrations. No administration has ever impressed me like this administration. At a lot of other administrations, I got the like slimy bureaucrat, lifelong DC person vibe from most of the people I met. Within this administration, it has consistently been cool, young conservative or tech bro. And I think that we see this in the efficiency. I mean, that's why the Maduro raid went as well as it went. That's why the Iran campaign is going as well as it's going.
I'm so impressed. Yes.
Yeah, is because these organizations, and some of them, like literally the guy, Secretary of the Army right now, is an old friend of ours, Dan Driscoll. He's an old friend of ours, a tech bro, and he runs the army right now, right? Like, and why are they doing well? Because they have people like him. What was it that he said when he first took over the army? I really liked some of the
dude. He said a variety of fantastic things. No, he's just modernizing it and helping it work better. He's improving so many things.
Yeah, what he was really focused on is like, we need to get away from like an army that is staffed based on, you know, political kickbacks to, you know, X manufacturer, Y manufacturer, and we need to focus on what the troops actually need to get their jobs done. And that was the same with about how they fight. We had an episode on like the troops intentionally pulling their punches. Watch that episode. That was crazy for me to learn that like you couldn't shoot at a group until you knew they were armed. Like if somebody tagged a mosque, you can't shoot them now, right? Like playing by vampire rules, as they put it in that episode, right? And it's like, nope, I closed the door on a residential house. You can't come in. And they're just like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. Why were we ever doing this, right? And somebody's like, well, it could look bad. And it's like, I guess I don't care that much if it ends up looking bad. And I like that that's the approach that they've been taking to getting this handled. You know, don't put Americans in harm's way, but get things handled. If you want to see our, like, why are we in this war episode, we did that a few days ago with our war update. I don't want to go over all of the facts on the ground about the assassination attempts against Trump, the timeline to nuclear capability, which it appears had gotten really, really short. And one of the reasons why you can't have Iran with nukes, which I think a lot of people don't get, is they're like, well, a lot of countries have nukes and they're maybe malevolent actors on the world stage, but they're otherwise fine. Like Russia has nukes, right? And they're not our friends. China has nukes and they're not our friends. Why is Iran having nukes any different from these other organizations having nukes? And I think a lot of people can just see that and not understand with like they're asking the question, what's the word here?
Rhetorical question.
Yeah, they're asking it as like a rhetorical question without actually asking, no, why? And there is an actual answer to that why. The reason why Iran is nothing at all like North Korea or China or Russia is that Iran's core tactic in regards to foreign policy, to the tune of, I think when we looked it up, it was $4 billion a year, is funding terrorist cells in other countries. That is how Iran operates. Okay, they do not make alliances with other countries in the same way that China might or something like that. They predominantly operate by funding terrorist organizations. And when I say terrorist organizations, I mean non-state militias that are basically like giant Islamist gangs. And these groups have no trouble using something like a nuke on civilians if they ever got a hold of a nuke. And that is why Iran can't have nukes, because Iran having nukes is the same as Hamas and Hezbollah having nukes, right? And these organizations, you say, well, you know, they certainly wouldn't, they're always running attacks on the United States. Like, what are you talking about, right? Like, even recently, there was like a recent, what was the bombing of where they drove a truck into a synagogue kindergarten. And it was completely bombed out. And unfortunately, no one was killed because good guys with guns. But his like brother was in Hezbollah or something, right? You know, like these are like actually like on our doorstep level dangers. Yes. So I wanted to go into that for people who do not get why Iran having a nuke. And people can be like, oh, well, these other countries fund terrorist non-state actors. Not really. North Korea does not really fund terrorist non-state actors in other countries. China doesn't really fund terrorist non-state actors in other countries.
Saudi Arabia did.
Saudi Arabia, does Saudi Arabia have nukes?
No, from my understanding.
Yeah, so Saudi Arabia doesn't, the UAE does. But that's a core, it's the video where we talk about the Cold War between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But that's their core differentiation. Russia actually doesn't that often. It's very rare for Russia to fund non-state terrorist actors. They typically fund, when they're doing something like this, pseudo-states. So an example of that would be like Transnistria or like...
What?
Cuba. Transnistria is a breakaway state in Europe that's still technically living in the Communist Union.
I've never heard of this before.
You should look it up. It's really interesting. A fun thing to spend a night learning about, because they live with all of the old Soviet Union stylings and everything like that, and statues and programs.
What? Okay, I have to look this up. Like, how if I've never heard of Transnistria before?
And Russia will sometimes work with non-state actors, but more as like mercenaries to make money and gain control of resources, not in the way that Iran does, which is like maximum chaos strategy.
Transnistria.
Okay, I pronounced it wrong.
Officially known as the Pridnestrovian Moldovan Republic, and locally as Pridnestrovi, is a landlocked breakaway state. My God, you're right. Internationally recognized as a part of Moldova. Ah, interesting. That's just so bizarre. Okay, thank you for telling me about that. Sorry, just...
But if you look at something like Transnistria, even if Transnistria like somehow got a hold of a nuke, right? Sure. And note here, I've said that I do not actually believe that Russia has usable nukes. They have not run a nuclear test since before I was born. Over 30 years since their last live nuke.
Well, and the last time they decided to play test a lot of their
Soviet era equipment, it all fell apart.
And guns,
it fell apart disastrously. And a nuke is harder to maintain than a truck. So I do not think any of their nukes are functional. And for people when we're wondering why can I say that with such certainty, I am fairly certain that if they had any functional nukes, they would test them just to show the world, especially right now with the Ukraine war, that we still have functional nukes as like a way of escalation.
Yeah, I mean, this is why North Korea does it. No one else is going to believe them. And I think they also need to make sure they're actually working.
Yeah.
So there's that.
But the fact that the Russians don't do it, to me, is like proof positive they don't have working nukes. But even if they gave Transnistria a nuke, Transnistria they're not like Hamas or Hezbollah. They don't say death to America constantly. They don't constantly run terrorist orgs in other countries. They're more of like just like an illegitimate state. It's the same with like Cuba, right? Like Cuba is not our friend, but they're not constantly doing terrorist attacks on us, right?
Well, didn't you say that they are kind of where a lot of Antifa groups
a lot
are trained
of
or something?
Antifa is trained in Cuba, like the Antifa leadership.
So,
well, Antifa is bad, but it's not like Hezbollah or Hamas. To compare,
sure,
Antifa,
yeah. I mean, well, to a large extent, I think that maybe the way that much of Israel's leadership views the current conflict in Iran and their participation in it, it's just an extension of October 7th, where essentially Iran attacked them because they bankrolled the entire thing. I mean, it would not have been possible without them.
Yeah, and I think it's important.
And the entire message was, we're going to keep doing this until you don't exist anymore. And so they're like, okay, existential challenge, understood. They've basically neutralized Palestine. And so now they're moving on to the source of the problem, which is Iran. And if once they have Iran handled, like once Iran can no longer bankroll their continued existential threat, they'll be happy, but they're not going to be happy until then.
I want to point out and elevate something Simone is saying here, because a lot of conservatives who are pro-war are often a little cucked on this point, where they think that Israel and us have the same aims in this war. And we very much do not have the same goals in this war. To Simone's point, for Israel, their goal is to economically destroy Iran. They want to, if they could, they would bomb the South Pars oil field. If they could, they would bomb, Iran's oil fields. They would bomb Karg Island. They would make it so that Iran could never economically recover, because they just want Iran gone in the most durable way that Iran can be gone as a threat. Whereas the United States, our goal is to just do as much damage to their military as possible and defang them in regards to nuclear capabilities. And outside of that, we don't really care that much. Trump mentioned regime change early on, but he mentions a lot of things, right? I don't know if that's realistic. Okay. So now what I want to do, well, I'll do it when Simone can rejoin the conversation. Why it's important to understand what I was saying about Iran and other sort of non-state terrorist forces that are constantly running attacks on the West, more on Israel than the West, but they constantly are funding terrorist attacks that we see in European countries and the United States. Our groups led to them are. And I think people don't realize how common these are because the news doesn't report them, because it tries to cover up anything that could make you Islamophobic or whatever. But just to give you an idea, just 2026, just this year, just these last couple months, there was an attack in Liege, Belgium, where an improvised explosive device was detonated. There was an attack in Rotterdam, Netherlands. There was an attack in Amsterdam, Netherlands on a school. There was an attack in Amsterdam, Netherlands at a commercial center. There was an attack in London, the UK, where a number of ambulances were blown up. There were attacks in Austin, Texas, where a shooter opened fire outside a bar, killing 3 and injuring 14. And he wore a t-shirt that said "Property of Allah." There was an attack in Michigan where they rammed a truck into a daycare at a synagogue. I don't know if that makes you not care about it, but yes, this happens all the time. Okay? We have been consistently under attack by Iran for a long time at this point. But if you listen to mainstream news, you would be unaware of it because of many of these attacks' incompetence. Iran is an active aggressor. Like up until this war started with us, Iran saw itself as at war with us and perpetually at war with us. We just weren't fighting back yet. What this war is us finally fighting back to a war that they had actively been operating, but we had been neutralizing. You can almost sort of think of it like Israel sitting there constantly zapping the missiles being sent at them and saying, well, we're not at war because the missiles aren't landing very often. And that's what it was terrorist attacks on the United States and Iran, is we were at war. We were just zapping most of the terrorist plots, like the 2 assassination attempts on Trump, before they ended up in anything meaningful. But you can't just sit there forever while missiles are being lobbed at you. And that's what was functionally happening in the United States with Iran. So finally, and I think we can really wrap up Tucker's world perspective in something that happened with Alexander Dugin interview that he had in 2024. This was Dugin when talking about Putin. So this is like a pro-Putin guy. He goes, Putin is a traditional leader who contradicts the global progressive agenda. Given someone with nuclear weapons is standing strong defending traditional values that you're going to abolish, I think they have some basis for this Russophobia and the hatred of Putin. To which Tucker agreed, saying what you're describing is clearly what's happening and it's horrifying. So essentially what has happened to Tucker, because of the circles that he's around, is he has become incapable of distinguishing between Western values and urban monoculture values, and therefore is taking the position of things like Sharia law or Russia against American interests and against Western interests, because he can't see how that's different from, as he would call it, global homo. And when you understand that, you can understand why he acts so traitorous, because in his mind, the West is the enemy, because the West is global homo. There is not a oppressive urban monoculture trying to stamp out true traditional Western values. The two things are one and the same.
Yeah, okay. He's lost the nuance of it.
Yes.
And and I guess he's also, I don't want to say fallen for, but, and I'm not also going to say that Russia's choice to position itself as the country of traditional values is illegitimate or fake in some way, but it is manufactured. That doesn't mean that it's fake, because that, saying I'm committed to this is saying I'm committed to this. And I respect that. Like that's them saying, these are our values. We're going to support them as a government. And they're standing behind them with a whole bunch of like media regulations and education things and whatnot. But it's still propaganda. I'm not against propaganda, but it's still propaganda. And he doesn't seem to recognize that and the role that it's playing. So,
yeah. Well, I also think that the whole gay thing really has not that much to do with how good of an ally you are against the urban monoculture. The entire gay culture talking point has been largely dropped by the new right coalition. Like, it's not an important hill to die on when you're trying to protect your culture. And by conceding that point, you can get a lot of useful allies, which is why the Trump administration, obviously the famous article of Trump's big gay White House about how it is hugely disproportionately gay, and it is disproportionately gay, just like objectively. Then we have a weekend episode on due to recording issues that happened that day. If you want to be a paid subscriber, if you want to watch it. But the point is gays have been a useful part of the new right coalition. Like, it's a weird boomer talking point. Like, Venezuela's better because they're anti-gay. There's a lot of things I care about before I care about anything having to do with gays. Right? Like,
yeah, that is genuinely bizarre. That was my first time hearing that Venezuela had rules against gay
people
marriage.
Are like, in Russia, like, being gay is a crime and you can't even promote gay interests. And I'm like, I don't care. Like, what? There are so many bigger fish to fry in the culture war than gay. Like, what? I mean, it's like, what are you doing? Are you fighting like a 1990s style culture war here? And it's like, oh, he literally is fighting 1990s culture war, and he doesn't understand that the field has changed. Next, I want to go to Fuentes, because Fuentes has had some stuff recently that I think has better delineated his real position, and I'll be tight on this. He has said, I want Iran to win and the United States to lose. Iran is fighting for America more than the America is fighting for itself right now. And Iran is fighting our war, actually. And the only reason Israel isn't dropping bombs on you is because it's not your turn yet. To Trump, he said, you're a demonic force, you're a liar, you are diabolical, you're a traitor. Now, I note, before this election, Trump said multiple times he planned to bomb Iran.
As you know, there have been 2 assassination attempts on my life that we know of, possibly due Iran, but we've been threatened very directly by Iran. And I think you have to let them know that you do any attacks on former presidents or candidates for president, your country gets blown to smithereens, as we say.
This is not like you weren't paying attention if you're surprised by this. In fact, he has said that we should bomb Kirk Island as far back as the 1980s. Trump said that we should bomb Kirk Island. So he's been thinking about this for a long time. He said this in both of his elections, actually, that he wanted to bomb Iran. So it was actually weird that he didn't bomb Iran the first time. So to be like, Trump's a liar, it's like, no. He then goes, this is a war of aggression for Israel. But Iran did the October 11th attack. Like, what are you talking about, right? Like, those were Iran-funded non-state actors. Americans will die. First of all, so it's not a war of aggression for Israel, but 2, it's a useful war for the United States. As I've said, Iran has been at war with us. They have had no concern. Like, one of the interesting things about this war is we haven't seen, people are like, why haven't we seen like a bunch of attacks on like American infrastructure around the world after this war started, given the number of non-state actors that Iran's been funding? And the answer is just because they were already trying as hard as they could before this. We have been an open target. We have just been neutralizing them up until this point. The difference with this war is now we're fighting back. And to frame things in another way, we'll get to why he does that, because I'm finally beginning to understand. Trump's Iran war is shaping up to be a total catastrophe. By the way, not true. It's going quite well. Not to mention a fundamental betrayal of his movement's principles and voters. Israel first means America last. So what you're really seeing here, like the more I think about it and I try to understand his perspective, he is above all else in his world perspective, anti-Israel and anti-Jew. That determines every other position he has. And he is fundamentally totally okay with throwing Americans under the bus, American interests under the bus, unborn children under the bus, the Conservative Party under the bus, literally anything under the bus if it goes against the interests of Israel. And this is how he feels on like all of his key issues. The other group who he really hates are Indian Americans. And this is why, despite J.D. Vance presumably being like his ideal, like Catholic presidential candidate, right? But J.D. Vance is in an interracial marriage. So J.D. Vance is like a demon in his mind, right? That doesn't make sense. Has he
said anything explicitly about his marriage with Usha?
Oh, yeah. He talks about Usha quite frequently as being like a core proof that J.D. Vance is not a real, conservative team player.
Oh my God.
And the fact that he would cave on somebody who otherwise is presumably so ideologically aligned with him, even on the American First stuff, if people don't know, like the rumblings in the White House, is J.D. Vance is quite against the Iranian campaign. And the Iranian campaign is seen as like a victory for the Rubio faction of the White House. And people have tried to get like JD to come out publicly and say this because these are all the rumors that he's been grumbling about this. And first, like people are like, do you have a problem with that? Like, no, people should disagree with in an institution. But 2, the point I'm making is JD Vance should be Nick Fuentes' greatest ally, right? And what I've realized is Nick Fuentes hates his enemies much more, or his perceived enemies, much more than he likes his allies or even himself. And he is willing, and this shows fundamentally why he hasn't gotten married, even though it would be trivially easy for him to get married, why he hasn't had kids, while he does see himself as like a white Catholic besieged by outsiders who needs to protect this white Catholic way of living and expand this white Catholic way of living, he will always and everywhere spend more time and energy among his base and followers, attempting to sabotage and tear down the groups he sees as not perfectly aligned with his interests, than actually promoting the interests of his own group.
Well, he also gains a lot more from having flame wars with people than.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's easier to, complain about, Usha and Vance having interracial kids while not having any white kids of your own, right? Like, it actually is hard to make a relationship work and have kids and raise that next generation.
Well, I'm surprised that you think it would be easy for him to find a partner when he spends so much time streaming, that it would be pretty difficult for him.
Because he has a pool of people who want to be his partner. There are like...
Yeah, but he's stated very explicitly that he does not want a wife who knows, he really wants an offline wife.
Right. So
and they're out there, but you have to be offline to find them. So he's
there have been stages of my life where I tried to come up with excuses for why I wasn't dating during that stage of my life. And well, there's no pretty girls at my school. He is defining a woman who definitionally wouldn't like him. A woman who wants to be offline and live a private life is not a woman who wants to marry Nick Fuentes, right? You have
to disagree, because no, there's this world in which he finds this very offline traditional Catholic girl who wants to find a respectable husband who she personally just gets along with, who has his job and makes his money, and she basically doesn't have any interest in him intellectually or in his work intellectually.
Yeah.
She just does the work and has the kids and raises the kids and homeschools the kids with a good Catholic homeschool system. And there are lots of women out there in the offline Catholic community. I'm sure.
No, Simone, hold on. Really? You actually think if Nick Fuentes wanted that, he couldn't get that? He could.
He would have to invest a lot of time in it at the expense of his stream
this
time.
is how he does it. At the end of every stream, he asks his audience, who presumably has sisters, daughters, people at their church who would be very happy to take a chance on a famous streamer and say, hey, do any of you know a girl who fits this profile? If you do, put her in touch with me. If you do, put her in touch with me.
Fair point. Fair point.
Just
someone who is offline, someone who doesn't know who I am.
Yeah,
because he doesn't want to date someone.
Even if he wanted this, basically the reason he says that is not because that's what he actually wants in a wife, but he's using that to try to create a category of woman that he will never interact with, so he doesn't need to explain why he doesn't actually have a wife. And as he's pointed out even himself, when groypers get married, they leave the movement. He's created a movement that people don't want to, that's not able to self-sustain or intergenerationally sustain itself, because it's not a movement about actually winning. It's a movement about perpetually fighting. And in a movement about perpetually fighting, your enemies matter more, and your enemies losing and stumbling matter more than your allies winning. And that's why he's willing to perpetually throw America under the bus, so long as it might hurt the Jews. That's why he's willing to throw potentially unborn babies under the bus, so long as it prevents JD Vance from winning the presidency because he's in an interracial marriage, or Trump from winning a presidency because Trump picked JD Vance, someone who's in an interracial marriage, as a VP, right? That is the extent to which he's willing to self-sabotage, because the fight is the point. And that's what he wakes up every day to do, to fight these enemies, not to advance the interest of his allies. And I really think that there are few worse allies you can have than somebody who would do that, because that makes them incredibly dangerous, especially when, to win in the long run, you're going to need to ally with the Jews, because they are the only high fertility, technologically advanced civilization on Earth right now. And when the urban monoculture dies, you do not want to be on their bad side. They have the ability for power projection, even just from a self-preservation perspective.
Yeah.
Much less from a power projection perspective, which is what they help the United States do right now in situations like Iran. They're actually fighting alongside us. Who is not? Europe, even though Europe is facing terrorist attacks by groups funded from Iran all the time. But do they? No. Anyway, this has really helped me understand these groups better and the psychology of these groups better. It's like hatred crack. Like, you do the thing that feels good, even though you know, like taking the meth or whatever, it feels good. That's what the groypers are doing. Even though they don't have kids, they don't have partners, and they're not really part of the civilizational game, and they'll die out at the same rate the urban monoculture will die out. They're not really relevant. And I've pointed this out. Most of the people in this faction, other than Tucker Carlson, who's like a boomer and different, do not have large families. Like, very few groypers have large families. This is not an intergenerationally, and the other culture warriors who like get all racist about it, like Ann Coulter, she doesn't have a family. She doesn't have a husband. She could get married at any time. She's an attractive woman. Like, they care more about who they're fighting against than their side actually winning. And so they're not really relevant. Like, you can partner with them to get votes, but be aware that, like, if you have these people in your life, they will lead you to toxicity and failing out too. So it's, I think, useful to not over chew this particular cud. The final point I wanted to make, which was really apparent for me, is on the Iran war. Sometimes I have this view is like, are we being stupid here? Like, because I do hear some loud voices like complaining against it, but then I look at all the other stuff that the loud voices against it, like Nick and Tucker and Candace Owens are saying, and I'm like, oh, like everything else that they're saying seems pretty crazy. And then I look at the people who are pro it, like Asmongold or Nuxanor, and I'm like, I pretty much agree with 99% of the stuff they say, like, and they seem to be arguing in much better faith. So I'm pretty sure, like, I don't see many sane thinkers out there who are against this, is what I'd say. Anyway, good to chat about this, Simone. I don't know if this changed your perspective on anything.
You did bring to the biggest differing opinion I have is that Tucker Carlson is taking the approach he's taking largely because he's a very agreeable person and empathetic to the people to whom he is exposed. And this, by the way, is not something that's unique to him. It even, I think, and this is, I think, even admitted by people in the Trump administration, Trump seems to also often be very colored by his most recent conversation with people.
Yeah.
And, you know, like really excited about whatever he was just talking about, because he's a very like now oriented, what can I do now kind of person. And maybe this is more of a boomer thing. So he and Trump may have that in common. But this, because of the nature of his work, has led Tucker Carlson, by speaking, as you point out, with primarily elites in the US who are bearish on the United States culture, and then elites in other countries who are very bullish on their culture, it's going to lead him to have this very negative toward the US, positive toward, often for an adversary's attitude. So that explains a lot. And of course, also the nature of his work, whereby controversy drives clicks, is going to lead him to talk more with adversaries, to be like, well, let's hear them out. Let's see what they have to say. And then he goes and talks to them and is like, oh, wow, well, they say that their culture is really great and they seem like really nice people. And so I think their culture is great. And then, you know, he goes and has some dinner with elites in New York on his connecting flight back to his small cabin in Maine.
Yeah.
And they're all like, oh, the US is horrible. Everything's terrible. A war in Iran is awful. And he's like, oh, wow, yeah, I mean, they're totally right. We had a great dinner. And so then, you know, the US is horrible. And so that's what's going on. And it's all very innocent. And it's a result of the nature of his work, misaligned incentives and exposure, plus agreeableness and a kind of boomer attitude. So, okay, everything, yeah, this helps me model better. And I appreciate that.
I appreciate you. I love you. And if you guys want to check out AI role play or adventure scenarios, that's all working really well on RFAB these days. And we're working on getting the agent feature up and running. So
yep. And in good old fashioned American style, you're having steak and bread rolls tonight. So
I am
enjoy.
so excited.
Good. I'll send you a link very shortly because I didn't make one yet. One moment.
I had almost talked myself into believing that he's actually a good actor. He's just old and confused. But when I remembered the instance of him saying that Iran surrendering would mean that the U.S. troops would have to get to, I don't know, whatever, grape their daughters and women, and that's what unconditional surrender always means, like, because that's what we did in Japan, of course, and Germany, of course, that's just like a crazy thing. That's something you would only say. I mean, he's trying to emphasize what a severe term that is for Trump to be asking, and it is. I think it's a mistake to ask for unconditional surrender. But Trump's not really asking for unconditional surrender if you're actually paying attention to things. This is just one negotiating tactic. So I framed this as charitably as I possibly could. He is... Why is he saying this? he doesn't want a Sharia law country toppled, I guess. And he's upset that, I mean, it's obvious that we don't have like huge numbers of Americans' lives at risk because of this. So I can't say he's doing it for that. It's probably not about the economy. I think it's about like he's in a circle where hating on the war seems normalized to him. And so any argument he can make, even if it's obviously fallacious, is okay to make. That's my best guess on this.
They have a built-in ring light.
The new MacBook.
Like the border of my screen, is like the border of my screen is just a bright white border to make a ring light effect, which is kind of an interesting trick. I like it. I mean, I don't see the effect. I don't know how effective it actually is, but it's not bad positioning for a ring light if you're going to have one. But the problem is I don't know how to turn it off. So now I have to like move show notes around to make it not weird. Still cool. So whatever.
Any comments from the show today?
Oh yeah. Some fun exorcism stories just of like this and that, you know, one person talking about how, and this was an Anglican preacher going in to give an old lady in this case an exorcism because she felt like stuff was weird around her house. And then 6 months later, she asked for another one. And like, she kept asking for more exorcisms. And he's like, well, there's clearly something wrong here. Like, what's the recurring problem? So he started asking her about like who's coming and going and what they're leaving there. And it turned out her daughter was like kind of a Wiccan spiritualist, crystals kind of person. And we all know crystals people. And she kept going to the house and being like, oh, the energy's wrong. I'm going to leave crystals everywhere. And then the issues would come back with this lady. And so the priest was like, okay, stop letting your daughter leave crystals here. Her wicked nonsense is not welcome in your household. And that did the trick. So people also applauded your pronunciation of Monsignor. And I love, I feel so alone when you mispronounce things, and I chuckle to myself and I want to have a conspiratorial glance with someone, and it's such a waste that I can't. And now that we have this podcast, I can, because I just go to the comments and people are also chuckling, and then I get to have an asynchronous conspiratorial glance and like wink with them. And it's so great. Like it's not wasted. I just feel like your mispronunciations and the way that you just mutilate other languages is this beautiful.
Without care, I just don't care either. I'm not like trying to get it right or something. I get annoyed when people are like, "Oh, you say it this way," and I'm like, "I don't care. It's not an American word."
Well, but yeah, then we discovered that like when we watched the new season of King of the Hill, that's basically just a Texan culture thing and a running joke in King of the Hill because Frank Hill mispronounces foreign words all the time in the same way that Malcolm does. So. It's your culture, Texas, it's your heritage. Yes, to mince
my heritage.
Foreign words. Yes.
That's right. Okay, what are you doing? You telling scary stories?
Yeah. And the one I said before was once upon a time Dad picked up a car and slammed it on the ground. His car.
Like a big car?
Yeah, like this car.
Wouldn't that have been too heavy?
I was thinking it like this.
Is Dad super strong? Is that how I did it?
Yeah. Once upon a time, a ghost slammed Dad in the head.
Why? Is that your idea of a scary story?
Once upon a time, a ghost slammed Dad at his house walls and everything.